Hey everyone, welcome to All Things Engineering by Sangha. So we're going to be talking about the different fields in computer science and different prospects in terms of jobs. Okay, I think we can get started. Yeah, Anand and Sudarshan, you can get started.
So, hey everyone, I'm Anand, and the first CS field to be discussed in this session is data science. So, firstly, what exactly is data science all about? So, the formal definition reads as follows: like data science is a field of study that combines knowledge of math, domain expertise, and programming skills to derive meaningful insights from various data sources. So, in short, data science is all about extracting, manipulating, modeling, and analyzing the data to aid in corporate level decision making. So, there are several different applications where data science has a huge impact. Some of them are included in the slide. So, the common aspect to all these applications is that they involve working with data in some form or the other, like as expected. So let's take stock trading for instance. So it involves commerce as the domain knowledge to know like how the prices fluctuate. And then to understand the various trends, mathematical concepts such as random walk theory would be very helpful in understanding. And adept programming skills is required to weigh in all these factors so that we predict the future trends of the prices in a scalable fashion. So this way we find that data science is not a CS only field, but it's rather an interdisciplinary field. So the other applications also you can find various domain knowledge required. So these are certain job prospects in the field of data science. So all these roles, they work on different aspects of the data. Like for instance, if you take data analyst, they analyze the data to derive certain insights. The data engineer, they manipulate the data which is retrieved from in different formats from different sources. The data architect, they build the overall architecture of the analytical tool required to derive certain insights. So the commonality of all these roles is that they require a good knowledge of working with data in various forms.
Hey guys, about the research prospects in data science, right? So first of all, you have the enhancement and manipulation of existing algorithms. So in like certain machine learning algorithms, you guys can find improvements in it, and you can, say even get a new algorithm so that you get a better result in the end. Another aspect of research is building domain-specific frameworks. Then also you can also do corporate research in big tech firms like Microsoft and Google. They have their own research wing, right? So the role you play over there will be a little different compared to say a software engineer in the same company. And as mentioned earlier, right? So data science is an interdisciplinary field. So in the other fields that may involve data science as well, you can do research, say, for example, in the medical fields, right? So there as well, you have certain places where data science and research go hand in hand, right? So that is about the research prospects in data science. Finally, I just like to say, how you could get started off in the field of data science. So the first thing that is pretty important, not just in data science, but any field you choose is, understanding, getting a good grasp about the programming language you choose, right? So in data science, typically you have Python, R, MATLAB, or Octave, which is being used. You also have other languages, but these are quite widely used. So it's important to understand what the programming language offers to you in whichever field you're doing. So in data science, say what you should understand, what say Python or R, that they offer to you, and what all you could do with the language. So that is point one. And then the second point is about learning about the data itself, right? So the types of data which is involved, and also say about how data is stored in the database systems, specifically like NoSQL databases and relational databases. So learning about this would especially help in, say, the data architect or the data engineer roles, right, as you saw earlier. So this is another place where you could get started into data science. This is another aspect of data science. And finally, you could go through various courses, various books, and other resources that are available online and offline. So make sure you access the internet, make use of it, and also you can consult your peers or your seniors who are in the field of data science to get a better understanding, right? And for those of you who need a list of things, right, a list of courses, a list of books that you could read, or a list of blogs you could see, there's a good repository on GitHub. It's known as Awesome Data Science. You can just Google it up and you'll find the repository quite easily. And it's a well-maintained repository. It has a very well detailed resource list, right? So you guys could check that out if you want particular resources, and choose the resources that would aid you, however, like in your this thing, right? So that's about how you would start your journey into data science. And that's pretty much it from our side in the field of data science. I hope you guys have some understanding about the field of data science. Thank you. And we could go to the next topic.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Harshal, and with me is Ganesh, and we'll be handling the first part of full stack development, the front-end engineering. So, what is front-end engineering exactly? Front-end engineering deals with the visual part of the website, as the name suggests, the forefront of the website. It handles the planning, designing, and creation of the UI components, user interface components, and the creation of the entire UX of the website, that is the user experience, from the ease of access to the navigation and to the data presentation. Then it aims for the accessibility, aesthetics, performance, and security of the website. Because whenever a user accesses the website, he should be guaranteed with some amount of security so that his data is properly handled. He should be able to access the website with some good performance so that the website is not slow, it is responsive. Moreover, it should be also accessible on different platforms which we have. For example, tablets, laptops, desktops, and phones. Then, and it is more if a design-oriented job. That's why you'll be working in collaboration with the design team.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Ganesh, and I will be talking to you guys about the career path if you guys would like to pursue front-end engineering. So when you take any business, it requires a website, and mainly this website needs to be such that it catches the eye of the customers. They need to design it in such a way that the customers are able to use it well, and also they find it beautiful. And this is the work of a front-end engineer. So they need to ensure that there's a smooth running for the consumers who are using the website. And there is all sorts of designs, there's all sorts of good looks on the website. That this essential skill or requirement is what has a good market for front-end engineering. Also, front-end engineering is one of the steps towards full stack development. Talking about front-end engineering, it itself is not a great skill, as in just knowing front-end engineering is not going to help you in a great sense, but full stack engineering is definitely going to help you. And front-end engineering is one part of it. It's like the starting of it. So whenever you're trying to start off with building websites, you're going to have to start off with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So this is a building block per se. Thirdly, if people who are into design, say like Photoshop and Corel Draw, them, if they know that they can design well, they can also pursue a career in front end engineering, because there are tools right now available that will allow you to design and directly convert it into CSS and HTML. So because of that, the coding part of front end engineering has become relatively less right now, and people who have an artistic sense can pursue a career in this field.
Okay, so now there are majorly three platforms in front-end engineering. One of them is Angular, the other is React, and the last one is Vue.js. Now, all of these are open source and they're pretty much well settled, but Angular and React are more older than compared to Vue. Vue is a recent technology which has come up. So now these all technologies, they help in creating something called as the SPA, a single page application. That means the entire code is compiled into a single page, a single web page, which has the navigation in it. React is a framework which was built by Facebook for creating all those single page applications that to fully functional, which can be later ported to a mobile application using React Native. Whilst Angular is a framework built by Google, which is a bit more complex and has a steeper learning curve, but it is also widely used. And Vue is somewhat created by an hobbyist, an ex-Google employee, who was focused on minimizing the coding aspects of the front-end engineering, as my friend Ganesh just told that. It tries to reduce all those coding aspects and gives a easier path for developers. But then again, if you're sacrificing some coding aspect, then you're having fewer features. So that's why if you want to get started with the front-end engineering, or rather creating a complete full stack site, React could be one of the better frameworks to get started with, because it has a relatively graspable learning curve. And with this, I'd like to end. Thank you.
Yeah, hello. So I'm Nirmal, and I'm going to talk about the other side of the coin, to say, of full stack development, that is back-end engineering. Next slide. Yeah, so a back-end engineer is basically responsible, or he's more primarily focused on how a website works rather than how it looks. So how it looks in the user interface is handled by the front-end developers. The back-end developers is more focused on how the website works rather. So they write code that focuses on, let's say, the functionality or the logic which powers the applications, whatever they're working on. So behind the scenes work of a website is more what the backend engineer deals with. So most of the time, the technology which is used by backend engineer, backend developer is not directly seen by the user. So the primary responsibility of a backend engineer is to build the structure or the design of a software application. They set foundations for what the overall team needs to do to achieve the main goals. So the primary functions can be writing APIs, interacting with the database, creating libraries, working on there's a business logic and data architecture and so on. The day-to-day aspect of a backend engineer involves optimizing server. They're more focused on how responsive the site is and the speed, and they are mostly work on how they can optimize the server as such. Next slide. So for those of you who don't exactly know how the whole system, the client server architecture works, so this is how it works with the front end and the back end. So the server and the business logic and the database storage is all taken care of by the back end developing part. The front end deals with how the client responds in the web browser. Next slide. So for those of you who want to get into backend, the backend is a tad more technical than front end development, to say. So, but anyway, whatever the case, you guys need to start with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, regardless of whether you're doing front end or back end, because that's very important. A backend engineer also needs to have a solid grasp on object-oriented programming concepts and how to do software design knowledge, so software architecture, how exactly the client and the server reacts with each other. So popular languages right now to start with backend is Python and Ruby. PHP is quite old. So PHP
It's one of the first dynamic programming languages, so it's quite old. I think about 75 to 80% of the websites available online are built in PHP, but it's quite easy, but it's not that trending to say. As now, more it's Python and Ruby. So the only difference between Python and Ruby is that Python is more popular. Otherwise, they're both the same. They're both object-oriented programming, and they have a wide like online. They have a very good community. Also, a full stack developer, a backend developer needs to know version control. Version control, Git. So version control is basically keeping track of how the changes and software. And they need to understand accessibility and server compliance. So this mainly involves security aspects of a website and how to prevent attacks and stuff like that. And the main part, this is very important, the backend developer needs to know CRUD operations. So CRUD is create, read, update, delete operations, and needs to be thorough with database. So a full stack developer is someone who has a good grasp on both front end and back end engineering. Yeah, that's all from my part. You can go to the next slide.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sushant Rao, and I would be dealing with one of the concepts of theoretical computer science, and that happens to be programming languages. Could you go to the next slide? Thanks. So what exactly are programming languages? A programming language, as mentioned here, is a formal language comprising a set of strings that produce various kinds of machine code output, which basically means that you just use a set of strings to produce machine executable code by performing certain operations on the source code. Okay, so this is the basic idea of programming languages. And programming languages were developed with the mindset to be able to program systems. Initially, there was only hardware. We could not actually manipulate the way machines would perform. So that is why the concept of programming languages came, where we could program hardware systems. So that is the reason behind introducing programming languages. Harshal, could you go to the next slide? So, how exactly do like almost all programming languages follow a certain generic pattern? Okay, so this generic pattern happens to be lexical analysis, syntax analysis, and then code generation. Okay, lexical analysis is also known as tokenization. That is, from the source code you construct tokens. Okay, so that is called tokenization or lexical analysis. And once you create the tokens, right, you will perform syntax analysis, or also known as parsing. That is, you will parse these tokens to construct a meaningful and context-rich representation, which could be it could be any data structure, but most oftenly you will find that almost like you will find bytecodes or abstract syntax trees, because these are very useful while being able to generate machine executable code. So that's why people prefer bytecodes or ASTs. And here an example is given of how exactly a Java code is compiled. So first of all, you will have your Java source code in the .java file, and then you will run the Java compiler on the source code to produce a bytecode, Java bytecode. That is the executable bytecode. So once you get that executable bytecode, what will happen is you have something called as the Java virtual machine, which will basically take this bytecode and either it'll interpret it or just-in-time compile it. We'll get into just-in-time compilation a bit later, but this is the rough idea. And what are virtual machines? In programming languages, virtual machines are used to convert a certain executable file into its native into native executable code, irrespective of the operating system or architecture. That is, Java was one of the first programming languages to introduce the concept of virtual machines. Okay. Yeah. And here's given an example of Ruby as to how it works. So it's the same idea. You have certain source code that's tokenized, then it's parsed, and then you generate the S expression. S expression here happens to be the AST, and that AST is in turn compiled into native machine executable code by the yet another Ruby VM. So, what are the recent advancements in this field? Just-in-time compilation is one of the biggest features. What exactly is just-in-time compilation? It's conversion of intermediate representation, as I said, right? Bytecode or abstract syntax trees. So these are compiled into native machine code at runtime. So this is one of the biggest advancements in programming languages. To give an example, Dart has an incremental just-in-time compiler, which is the reason for Flutter being able to provide with stateful hot reload. So that is one of the biggest achievements of the Dart programming language. It's incremental just-in-time compiler. And then the other recent advancements are parallel systems. Like as we know, there is a big requirement for performing parallel computing, etc. So in the recent in the recent times there's been support for parallel systems and multi-core programming, like you can execute your code on different cores as well. And another feature or another optimization that currently organizations are looking out for is being able to build secure and reliable virtual machines. As we know, there have been a lot of cyber attacks in the recent past, and not all of them are actually attributed to the programming language, but programming languages can be hacked around with, or you can play around with the programming language and you can lead to attacks. So, and one of the examples would be memory leaks and stuff like that. You could have you can pass certain rejects and you can lead to the programming language in an endless loop or something like that. So there is a big requirement for building secure and reliable virtual machines. And then there's also this concept of hardware optimizations. So Google built this cloud TPU, which is an application specific integrated circuit, and what this exactly does is it blends very well with very big floating point operations. So it empowers the user to run a lot of operations simultaneously. And then there is YouTube's video transcoding chips. So these are application specific, like you build certain hardware to match your software requirement. Like your software is performing certain operations and you would want your hardware to blend very well with it. So that is when you go for application specific integrated hardware chips or something like that. I should go to the next slide. Yeah, so language server. So language server is a certain tool that is used to interact with the development tools that is provided by your IDEs, or that integrates with your IDEs. So the concept of language server was designed or was thought of to standardize by Microsoft. Microsoft proposed an idea of standardizing this interaction between language servers and development tools. So that is the reason why we have a language server and its corresponding protocol, which is known as language server protocol, which is a JSON RPC. So the biggest advantage of this is that almost all IDEs now share a similar pattern, and you need not write several development tools very specific to a certain IDE or programming language. So all of them support a certain generic idea, and all of it is standardized now. So there is no requirement to keep rewriting the same functionality in different programming languages or different types of tools, like linting tools or hooks or something like that. So there is no such requirement now. All of them can be easily integrated with the language server by this idea of language server and its protocol. And whoever is interested, right, because this is a very interesting topic, so you can check out microsoft.github.io/language server protocol. So if you can find the details of the language server protocol, etc., there, with a very good representation of how exactly it works. A lot of programming languages are actually in need of these type of what do you say language server implementations. So for example, Ruby still does not have its own. It's a third party, this one. So there are a lot of programming languages which are still in need of this. Pretty good. Career opportunities. So one of the biggest career opportunities would be academia. A lot of institutes still now hire theoretical computer scientists, because this is the starting point for any computer scientist. So a lot of institutes like IITs or NITs do hire theoretical computer scientists to teach the concepts of theoretical computer science. And then there is research. This is, I would say, is one of the most paying jobs, because a lot of companies like Google, Microsoft, etc., offer you certain positions or posts at their labs wherein they work a lot on theoretical computer science. Like for example, the Dart language that was built by Google is it's an effort of 5 years, nearly 5 to 6 years at Google. That is when Dart was actually released. So that and this is backed by Google. So it's something similar. A lot of companies keep looking to go deep into theoretical computer science to achieve something bigger. And then coming to projects, a lot of organizations, like not these big organizations, but the intermediary organizations, wherein they're not capable of having their own product. Like Google is capable of building its own a language for itself, but not all companies are so capable. So that is when certain companies look forward to theoretical computer scientists on a contract based work. So that they hire people on a contract basis, and they would ask you to provide them with certain application specific solutions. And and you do get really well paid if your work is really good. And there is also these open source contributions which are very useful for you in other positions. Like if you're going to academia or research, your open source contributions do make a lot of difference. So that's it from my side. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Dhriti and I'll be giving an introduction of graphic programming. Yeah, next slide please. So what is graphic programming? So basically it is a field for you if you are a visual learner and are interested on how visual and audio information is basically translated into a computer's language and the whole science behind it. So what happens is it uses pictures and symbols in place of text. So in contrast to your regular text-based programming like C and Python languages, which uses line of code. Graphical programming does replace the text with pictures or symbols or physical things. So it is more of a less intuitive and cumbersome way for some programmers to show outputs of various things. All right. Next slide, please. Yeah. So one application of graphic programming is if you want to translate information of any physical events like engine testing to visual readouts. So when you're getting information or output in the terms of vibrations or something that is not being able to put into words or figures, that is where graphical programming is used. So the resulting user interface is used to control and monitor automated processes. So this is mostly useful when it comes to signal processing and even when you want to derive terrain and demographic data. And also nowadays it is being used as a programming language to help children understand math and engage in creative thinking because it is more of text-based outputs rather than more of picture-based outputs rather than text-based outputs. Yeah, next slide. So this is an example of how graphical programming looks like. So when you type hello world, it just doesn't print hello world as an output itself. It also prints a picture in case you code it that way. And so you already know how creative and engaging it is to the users who use it. Yeah, next slide. So these are some applications of graphic programming. It is used in CAD and image processing, machine drawing, and many other fields as well, as I mentioned before. And nowadays, it is also being used for cellular system design and as well as building design when I mentioned CAD and Revit. And when it comes to temperature gauges or any instrument used in that matter, it is used to employ block diagrams, connectors, and even visual instruments. Yeah, next slide. So where do you get started? These are some of the very good courses that are available online, even though there are plenty of resources available. And the first two, which is from Udemy and edX, are the really good ones and have good ratings. So you can go ahead and learn. Yeah, next slide. When it comes to job prospects, graphical programmers are mainly used in mainly come into picture in the gaming industry, and even when it comes to cinematography and 3D motion graphics, even for map making and computer-aided design of buildings and structures. So yeah, it's a really vast field, and if you are interested in design and coding, it's a plus for you. And how do you exactly get in? So there are no specific courses to just graphical programming as its own. These are just taken as undergraduate and graduate level courses in software engineering or computer engineering. And there are no actual prerequisites, but you can always be a little bit more fluent in text-based programming languages like, again, C, Java as well. And in case you don't really want to go into graphical programming, you can always go for software development, web development, and even video game development. So it's a really vast field again and has plenty of opportunities. Coming to universities, these are some of the listed amazing universities abroad as well as in India to pursue graphical programming. And yeah, that's all. If you have any doubts, you can put it up.
Hello everyone. So the next topic which we are going to, next field which we are going to cover is kernel engineering. So this presentation will be taken by me, Ali Murtaza, and Tarun. So first, let me tell you what kernel is. Kernel is a part of an operating system which basically facilitates the interaction between software application and the hardware. So the job of memory management and process management and all those things are interrupt handling are done by the kernel. So the kernel engineer, kernel developer or kernel engineer basically develops, write a code for kernel or basically maintains the kernel. So now I'll tell you what all things are required to become a kernel developer. So the first thing and the most important thing is the C programming language. So you have to learn the C programming language because the most of the part of this kernel are written in C program. So having a strong hold over it will be very helpful and is a must for a kernel developer. Now the second thing is the assembly. So the left out part, which is basically the part which is not written in C, is basically written in assembly, and those are the part in low level and low level parts of the kernel. And if you want to like work in it or like contribute in that particular part, then you have required to learn the assembly language. And the third and the next most important part is the fundamentals of data structure and algorithm. So these topics, like these things are faced most of the time by kernel engineer to develop to write a code which is more efficient in terms of time and space. So having a fundamental knowledge of data structure and algorithm is must to write a efficient code. Then next step will be the learning the core concepts of OS. So basically you are learning here what are the jobs of OS and what are the concepts and what all jobs does kernel do here. And finally, when you are done with all the basic, you have to study the Linux kernel, which is the most renowned open source project. Learning this, you can find a lot of links learning about Linux kernel internals online. I've also compiled few like videos and courses in this link given below. You can check it out if you want. And one more point I would like to add here is doing competitive programming, since writing an efficient code is like part of a kernel engineer's job. So CP will help you to develop an ability to write an efficient code in terms of time and space. Yeah, so now Tarun can tell you about the job prospects.
Okay, so looking at the job prospects, the Linux kernel developers is not going to decrease since Windows exists and because it's developing so fastly. Microsoft itself has joined the Linux Foundation, and has added many Linux command line tools to Windows 10. So there's opportunities there for Linux developers. Next, if you see, Android itself has a Linux-based kernel, and it serves as an example for the server OS. And today many companies who are working with Android and the Android kernel require many kernel developers. So and remember that Android is like present in over 1 billion devices. So it's a very important job. If you do land a job in Android and under kernel development. So, and if you see other big companies like Samsung, Cisco, AMD, or Intel, other like hardware-based companies, they require drivers which connect their software and the hardware. So these drivers are mostly written by people who have a deep understanding about the kernel which is running on their hardware. And this kernel should be optimized, like Ali said, with time and space, since you will be using this code in real time. Now, the next would be like how Ali said, C is really important. There are other job prospects which require C and grip over assembly language. So kernel programming would not only limit you to kernel, but to other software development fields as well, which mainly works on C and assembly language. And finally, to help you with getting a grasp over Linux kernel, you would like, I'd suggest you to like look into the mailing lists of the Linux and look for the bugs, regressions, etc. And like try like looking into the bug and like how you can fix it, and try fixing a few bugs, as the only way like you can tell you're a good kernel programmer is if you understand the bugs, and if you have few bug fixes under your hood, and that way you can tell that you know the Linux kernel very well, and having a good grip over the Linux kernel will get you a long way as a kernel programmer. Finally, if you see the research prospects are mainly in algorithm based. Like if you see kernel requires, like there are many processes like many memory management, networking, storage, file system security. All of these in itself have many algorithms which can be open for research prospects, and you can contribute to them. So this was it from me and Ali. Thank you.
Yeah, hi guys, I'm Kaustubh, and I would be talking about embedded systems and computer architecture. So embedded systems and computer architecture mainly focuses on how the hardware and software layers interact with each other at various levels. So it utilizes the concepts of computer engineering along with electrical engineering. So if you are interested in both these fields, I highly recommend you to go through embedded systems and computer organization. So coming to what is computer architecture, the basic Wikipedia definition states that computer architecture is the engineering of a computer system through the careful design of its organization, using innovative mechanism and integrating software techniques to achieve a set of performance goals. So in layman's terms, I would say computer architecture includes the basic architecture of modern computers, like how a computer system is divided into different units and organized into different units. Like we have the memory unit, we have the processor, we have the IO devices. So, and if you take a look at a layer deeper, we have how the memory is managed, like different layers of different hierarchy of memory, how the memory is shared between these layers. Then we have IO devices, how interrupts work, what are the different flags involved in IO devices. Then in coming to the processor, we have in modern times we have different processors like GPUs, TPUs, even multi-core processors. So all these study come under computer architecture. Next, we have computer architecture deals with interaction between computer hardware and software at various levels. Computer architecture also deals with the performance evaluation and metrics. So performance evaluation in terms of number of instructions executed per second, what is the energy efficiency of a particular computer system, and many other matrices are there. It also includes instruction set design and computer arithmetic, etc. Yeah, next slide. So coming to the job prospects, we have the embedded system engineer. So as I told before, it merges the electrical engineering and computer science concepts, and you get to work on hardware and software designs for electronic medical equipment, industrial and military control systems, mobile communication devices, appliances, and remote controls. We have the computer architect. So an architect make sure all the pieces work together and functions well. They make design decisions to balance the effort, cost, performance, power, and a host of other factors also. And the computer architect also makes sure that the software and hardware teams are on the same page and knows what the other teams are expecting. Yeah, next. So coming to the research prospects, there is a lot of research opportunities in embedded system and computer organization. A few of them would be security, connectivity, memory. As I told before, how different layers of memory hierarchy are managed, and energy, like how to make the embedded system the most energy efficient, system architecture, networking, performance, real-time operating systems, and many more. Yeah, next slide. So some of the resources that I've compiled so that you could get introduced to, embedded system and computer organization are, so if you're into reading, so the books would be 8051 microcontroller and embedded systems using assembly and C, Hennessy and Patterson computer organization and decision and design. And I've added a link which contains an archive of many books based on these two concepts. And I also highly recommend you to go through the PPTs and material of different universities. I feel this is the most useful resource. Coming to courses, we have different courses in NPTEL, Coursera, and edX, and the edX one is the most useful one. And there is always YouTube through which you could answer small queries and get your answers in YouTube. Yeah. Thanks.
Hello everyone. My name is Aditya. Let's dive into DevOps. Next slide, please. Yeah. As you can see, the infinite looking symbol, it's called the DevOps infinite cycle. We'll get to it in a moment, but it's pretty much obvious that DevOps, as the name suggests, it's a word derived from two different words. One is development and the other is operations. Next slide, please. Okay, what is DevOps? Why do you need to know it? It's not a programming language or a software tool which you can go learn. Rather, it's a framework of guidelines or a paradigm, just like object-oriented programming system. It's an abstract concept that's used in application lifecycle management. And application lifecycle management involves planning, coding the application, testing it, releasing it to the end user, operating and monitoring, as you can see from the previous DevOps Infinite lifecycle. All of these things, they come under application lifecycle management, and how you manage it is more about DevOps. Earlier, all these steps were done independently, like the development and the operation teams, they were independent, and this led to conflicts, bugs, and a very inefficient business model. So the idea behind DevOps services is to demolish the wall between development and operations and encourage more collaboration, accountability between these two teams, so that everybody feels responsible for the code, no matter where it is in the software dev lifecycle. Harshil, can you move to the next one? Yes. Okay, some of the benefits of DevOps are speedy development, resolving issues at production level, stability of the application, better business model. It also solves other problems such as irregular app releases and not meeting the end user requirements in time. Because if you don't meet the end user requirements in time, somebody else will, and you might end up losing a lot of money and a lot of resources and stuff like that. So DevOps is a good way to to collaborate between the development and operations and to keep your app running smooth. Next slide, please. These are some of the DevOps tools that are used for various processes in DevOps, such as like you might be knowing some of the VCS like Git or Mercurial, and some of you might be familiar with CI/CD tools that you can see here, like Jenkins or Travis CI, or some testing tools like Selenium. They're used in different parts of the infinite cycle we saw, which was building, coding, planning, testing, and then releasing, deploying, and operating. Next slide, please. My friend Abhinav would be taking up from here.
Hey everyone, I'm Abhinav and I'll be talking about the career path and job prospects. So in order to become a DevOps engineer, these are certain steps that you need to follow. Starting with, you need to have a clear understanding of what DevOps is and what it actually deals with. Aditya previously explained about the core of DevOps. It basically revolves around constructing a more productive and cost-effective approach that involves automation and deviates from the traditional procedures. Second is being aware of new and crucial technologies. Knowing certain concepts thoroughly is essential to build a career path in DevOps. Some of these concepts include operating system, scripting, cloud computing, etc. Many more. Next, as automation, no, the previous slide. So next, as automation plays an integral role in DevOps, it's necessary for you to be able to figure out an automated approach to solve any given problem. And finally, it's absolutely essential to build an impressive profile in DevOps by participating in the ever-growing and active DevOps community in order to gain intrinsic skills. Yeah, next slide. Now let's take a look at various job roles a DevOps engineer can take up. So starting with a build engineer. So the build engineer is a DevOps managerial position in charge of development teams. So this individual spends their time managing the build and development process and is responsible for ensuring build goals and deadlines are met in a fast-paced environment. Then we have the release manager. So the release manager is an oversight and managerial position that oversees the overall development pipeline, guiding both individual releases and overall release schedules. They spend much of their time coordinating with the build engineer and with other teams to ensure that the goals are met. Then we have the automation architect. Since a huge portion of DevOps relies on automated workflows and processes that streamline teams and minimize the need for intervention, the automation architect is a critical employee. The automation architect is responsible not just for researching and implementing automation systems, but for integrating those systems with other existing automation and non-automation systems. The production manager. So the production manager role is one that comes straight from the operation side of DevOps and brings with it the organizational and management skills necessary for a project to succeed. The DevOps software developer. The role of the software developer is crucial for any software focused company, but it's even more important for a DevOps team. In DevOps, a software developer is not just responsible for developing code. They also need to test, deploy, monitor, and support the code. The role is in essence a combination of the software developer and the QA roles. The DevOps engineer, also known as a platform engineer. The DevOps engineer is a person who oversees the support platform used for DevOps operation. The security engineer. So security engineers are extremely important, not just for the success of a product, but for the safety of the users using it. They need to be fluent with modern security standards, ongoing attack vectors, and user behaviors that typically bypass security and create holes. And finally, a data analyst. While development takes theory into account, when developing products and features, the data analyst takes the real data from real users and distills it down into actionable intelligence. Yeah, next slide. So these are certain resources that can help you gain more knowledge about DevOps, starting with the DevOps subreddit, which is pretty active and lively discussions happen every day. Then there are a list of 5 great books on DevOps.com and a list of standout books by TechTarget. So these books are a great source of knowledge if you want to kickstart your journey towards becoming a DevOps engineer. And then finally, there are some blogs like DevOps Guys and the Agile Admin. So these again give a lot of insight into what actually happens in the DevOps world. That's it from our side. Please put up your doubts. Thank you.
Stefan, you're not audible. Yeah, peace. Hi guys, I'm Tanmay, and I, along with the Stefan, will be introducing you to the network engineering. Next slide. Yeah. So what's the main task of the network engineer? So network engineers, they are responsible for setting up the computer networks. So as you may be knowing that everything from the mobile to the internet to the iPads to the laptops, everything is connected via the internet. So they are responsible for managing that networks. And so 2 things comes in it: the hardware part and the software part. So in the hardware part, the hardware person is responsible for managing the installation and the maintenance tasks of the network components, and the software software person, it monitors the network security or the network activity in specific, and the configures the network systems and maintains it. And the various subfields in the network and the internal security includes cryptography, the data security, and various fields. And for that particular field, that person have to manage the particular task and helps in like improving it. Yeah, next slide.
Yeah, I can take over.
Yeah, take
Next slide. Okay, so like Tanay mentioned, those are the general definitions for network engineers and network administrators and any such roles. So moving on to what blockchain is. So me and Tanay are going to talk about fields that we're personally involved in. I involved in blockchain. So what blockchain is essentially a concept that solves problems that has plagued systems for years and now. And those problems being centralization and efficiency. These are inefficiency. These are the two main issues that the concept of blockchain addresses. So what is blockchain? Blockchain, to wrap it down, to wrap it up and like put it in a gist, is a system through which there's no central entity on which everybody is dependent on. Like the central entity has to be working for it to happen, or the central entity must not be malaligned for things to work smoothly. No, blockchain basically eliminates that need. It creates a system which is decentralized, the keyword being decentralized, where every individual has the same amount of power, and they're not reliant on any particular one individual or one system for things to work smoothly. So what are the applications of blockchain? The applications in real life transactions, for instance, as you must have heard of cryptocurrencies and such, that you have now, you don't need banks to facilitate these transactions, right? You can have, you would ordinarily, if you were using a credit card, you need to apply your credit card at the grocery store. The credit card company would take a certain amount of fee, and then they give the go ahead to the transaction, and the transaction would happen. So what's happening there is that the transaction has to go through the bank, and the bank has to work and ensure that the transaction happens. So like there's another third party involved, wherein the transaction is just between you and that grocery store individual. So basically what happens is blockchain ensures that that it doesn't go through that other entity, and like as in it becomes faster. So it makes the whole process more efficient. And at the same time, the other entity, it takes it a certain fee, right? A certain fee. Even in blockchains, like there are transactions that requires fees, but then these fees are like minimal, like nothing compared to all these fees that centralized agencies pull every time they have to approve a transaction. So that's essentially what the blockchain can do, and its applications involve in transferring intellectual property, creating, maintaining records, and it even goes up to like the Telecom and Regulatory Authority of India using its capabilities for maintaining a database of all the mobile users and sending SMS to them through after approving certain sections of the user database through the blockchain. So there's a variety of applications, consensus-wise and process-wise. So yeah, that's it for blockchain. I'll give it to Tanmay.
Yeah. Along with the blockchain, the one of the important, or we can say the popular subfield of the network engineering is the cloud networking. So like you guys may have heard about the GCP, the cloud, Google Cloud Platform. So what's the cloud is? Like clouds are the servers that are accessed over the internet. So they are located in the data centers all over the world. So by using the cloud, like the users and the companies don't have to manage physical servers themselves, or on their machine, or run a software application on their own machine. We can share the data over the internet. So very simple instance of it is the Gmail storing our emails and the attachments in the Google Drive cloud storage, allowing the users to access the email and the files via the internet. So about the cloud networking. So cloud networking is the branch of the cloud computing, which offers the centralized computing resources that are shared to the stakeholders via the internet. And cloud networking, along with the resources, computing resources, they can share the networks too. So all the organizations and the companies, they can host their networking resources through the cloud. The advantages involved in the cloud networking first is the versatility. So with the increasing availability of the online content, many enterprises have turned to the cloud networking for better content distribution. So the cloud networking, it can be used for web content providers, or e-commerce retailers, or network operators looking to extend their network reach. And one of the great advantage of the cloud networking is the speed. Like by using the cloud network, it guarantees that the fast delivery of the content will take place, and that's because of these servers which are situated all across the world. And like this means that the content has less physical distance to travel between the servers, like giving the final users or us the faster access to the data. The again the about the reliability, so it's like it's very cost effective, and like we as a users have like can access it very easily. Yeah, about now no, last slide. Yeah, about the scope of the field, the one of the like great areas in which the research is taking place in the cloud network is the network systems and the algorithms associated with it. Again, like this research is further subdivided according to the various network systems and the algorithms associated with it. And talking about the like job prospects, the one of the role like very big companies hires for is the cloud network engineer, and they are responsible for managing the network architectures. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, so how you can like get started with, or like how you can explore the field. So one of the great platform like we can take the knowledge from is the NPTEL. So this platform basically have the IIT professors, like they teach the topics which are associated with the particular field. So this course in the NPTEL about the blockchain, this will like give you the very basic approach how you can approach the blockchain, like what are the areas you can explore. So the main area like we should go on with the blockchain is the data structures. So like any basic course like this, it will cover up those areas as well. And one more resource like we will recommend you to go for the blockchain is the Reddit platform. So this particular Reddit thread, it tells about it's basically a course. It will give you the resource links according to the week, and like maybe like in from week 1 to week 5, it will like give that particular number of links or the particular number of the resources where you can go to. And coming to the computer networking, so the book called the top-down approach, it also like, it starts from the very basic approach what's computer networking is, and goes on to very advanced level. So if like anyone is interested in reading, like has the habit of reading and going through the topics, they can like always refer to this book. Again, like the one of the Coursera course I would recommend is the cloud computing, very basic course, hardly a 24 hours course. You can go through it. Yeah, that's it. Thank you guys. Feel free to ask or any questions or reach us for any doubts.
Okay, hi guys. Assuming there aren't any doubts right now. Yeah. So coming from network security, we have one sort of similar field that we have, but focuses on something different, which is cybersecurity. Now, what is it? It's just the practice of protecting your computers, your servers, data, and systems from other malicious attacks and hackers, basically. So this is we call it either cybersecurity or information security, depending on the situation. Now, considering that more and more data is going online, and pretty much all our communications or data storage and everything is slowly going onto an online mode, and so we really rely on cybersecurity on a very high scale. So because of this, we need like it's a growing field, and we need more and more people taking up cybersecurity related professions in order to maintain that level of security. So the growing volume and sophistication of cyber attackers and attack techniques make this very serious problem that we have to tackle. Next slide.
Yeah, so I'll be talking about the different fields in cybersecurity where you as a job will be actually working in the combination of these fields. So network security. So network security is the practice of securing a computer network from intruders, whether targeted attackers or opportunistic malware. So there are different kinds of attack that can happen on an organization's network. So let's say, for example, there's an attack called a man in the middle attack. There's an attack called a man in the middle attack where a person accesses the network of the organization through some access points and steals all your data. So the solution for this attack is maybe increasing the encryption mechanism in the access point so that it's difficult for foreign members to access to your network. So you will be coming up with solutions like this to defend against common attacks or some specified attacks. So the main thing that's needed in this field is that you have to have a good information about the network engineering. So it's basically an extension of that. Application security focus on keeping software and devices free of threats. So if anyone of you seen a video of a person just getting the answers from the Google Forms by just changing some small piece of code, so these this is an example, kind of small example of this attack where an external person just uses the faults in the code of the application to get the information that is not supposed to be acquired. So you will be looking after these kind of small mistakes in that code and will be correcting them so that the information doesn't get out. Yeah, this is the previous slide, I think. Asha. Yeah. So information security, here you will be protecting your integrity and privacy of data. That is, you will be putting up firewalls, many authentications to access the data. So basically you will be protecting the data in your servers and memories. Yeah. So operation security, this includes the process and decisions for handling and protecting the data assets. So you will be creating a access level for every employee or every person in the organization. So let's say the CEO of the company will have a higher available access to the data, let's say in terms of level. So he'll have a level 5 access of data. That means he'll have access to all the data in the company. And a normal employee might have a level 1 access. That is, he'll be having a limited amount of access on the information and cannot access as much as data as the CEO. So you will be deciding all these factors that is required for giving the permissions for the employees and higher personnel. Disaster recovery and business continuity. So if you have seen in movies that there are cyber organizations that attack companies and steal all their data or erase all their data, which leads to the downfall of companies. So data is everything for a company. So if you lose that data, it's like the company doesn't even exist. So you have to find ways to get back this data. And this will be your job. So let's say now the attacker just blocks the access to your server. So you will be making backdoor accesses for us to access the data, or you will have backup servers which will have the data and it can be recovered later if it's gone. So next slide. Yeah, so this is the last field. It's end user education. So this addresses the most unpredictable cybersecurity factor, that is us, the people. So what we will do, that some person will just take a USB which is infected with a Trojan or a virus, and he will accidentally put it into his office system or his organization's computer. So which will lead to a breakthrough to the system through his computer because of these viruses. So what we will be doing is we will be educating these kind of people that what not to do and what measures he has to take to while downloading or using foreign USBs and such stuff. So we will basically be educating these people about the safety measures that we will be taking while operating the company's system. Yeah, next slide. Navya, take over.
Yeah. So when we're talking about a career in cybersecurity, we talk about how to get started with it. Now, there are a lot of requirements in cybersecurity. It requires you to know a little bit of everything, be it networks or the computer operating system itself. So let's get started with a few of the things you can start looking into. One is you need to have your very good problem solving skills, right? So most of this depends on cryptography, and which is basically governed by logic, encryption systems, math, and it's like very mathematical heavy field. So you need to be good at problem solving. The second is you need to have a good knowledge of firewalls. Here, IDS and IPS refers to intrusion detection systems and intrusion prevention systems, right? So these are just some fields you can look into, learn more about, and have a good, thorough knowledge of. The third is digital forensics. So that's kind of a field you might be familiar with from TV shows and movies and whatnot. Uh, that's a very up and coming field, be it with companies or even police or the armed military applications are tremendous in digital forensics. Fourth, as I mentioned before, this is relies heavily on cryptography. You need to have a good understanding of different cryptography systems and algorithms per se. And again, this also depends a lot on math and logic. So it's actually pretty fun to learn more about it. Then fifth, like I said, it's not enough to just know networking, right? You need to know operating systems too. You understand the basic levels, and make sure you know your computer before you can protect it, right? And seventh, finally, maybe the most fun thing of them all, if you need to learn how to prevent hacking, you need to know how you can hack too. These are some of the very interesting fields that you can look into and learn. There are courses on Coursera or EDX or even YouTube that you can follow, and you can read up about this pretty much anywhere on the internet. So I suggest that you guys go and give this a good look. And yeah, I think we're done.
Anyone
So
has
what
any
are you
doubts?
waiting for?
Yeah, tell Stefan, continue. No one has doubts.
No. I was just reading the last slide. So yeah, guys, let's get all things engineering. That's it. Any doubts? Everything is up.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for attending. If you have any doubts, you can contact any of the people whose emails were on the slides, or you can, if it's really urgent, you can put it up on the chat here. We hope you learned a lot and had a good time. Thanks everyone for attending.